the opposite side from us. And as I'm sure you've gathered, you can drive your car up it on a toll basis. That's not for everybody, however, because it's a pretty winding, twisty road, and it alternates between pavement and dirt surface in a few places. There are no guardrails to be found anywhere, and the drop-off on the down mountain side in a few places is very steep and hairy. I've done it once myself. That was enough for me. As an alternative, you can ride one of their vans up and get a guided tour.
Excuse me, do they still car races up and down this?
You're stealing my thunder. I was going to talk about that a little further ahead.
I didn't know.
I'll let you wait in suspense.
Okay, thank you.
It'll be a little more than halfway down the mountain.
Yeah.
Now, coming up ahead here, just to the left of the tracks, I don't know, maybe 25 yards or so, there's a little white sign that you'll see right next to the tracks. And that is a memorial to a young woman named Lizzie Bourne. Here it is coming up right here to the left. And Lizzie Bourne was 23 years old in 1855 when she became the first female casualty on Mount Washington. And to date, there have been over 150 deaths on this mountain since the beginning of the 19th century. The majority of them due majority of those deaths due to hypothermia. And Lizzie Bourne's case is not all that uncommon. Wasn't aware of the nature of the weather in this mountain, hiked up here, didn't have adequate clothing when she encountered grossly different conditions up here above the tree line, and quickly became hypothermic. And the tragedy of that story is that that spot marks the spot where she perished. And it was only about 100 feet below the summit. And at the summit at the time, there was shelter to be had. This was 1855, and the original summit house had been built in 1852, and the tip-top house was built in 1853. So she could have had shelter, but her hypothermia was so advanced and the fog was so thick that she had no idea where she was. Never found it. Notice a lot of debris along the tracks here, and track debris. That's because we're in the middle of a re-railing project. We're replacing all of the rail over the entire length of the railway, taking up the old lighter 25-pound rail, which you might see alongside the tracks, and replacing it with a heavier 100-pound rail, which is what we're riding on right here. And this makes for a smoother, safer ride. And we're about 75% complete with the project. When it's all done, we'll be removing all this debris from the mountain, but that takes a long time, and it can't be done while the trains are running, so it has to wait for the off-season. Now we're about to recross the Appalachian Trail here. You see the cairns, these little rock monuments marking the trail on both sides of the tracks. And this section of the Appalachian Trail on the north side of Mount Washington is called the Gulf Side Trail, because just down below there where you see that hiker through the fog to the right, the trail makes a sharp bend to the left and then winds its way all the way around a huge ravine called the Great Gulf, all along the lip, which is over there to our left, our right. And the Great Gulf is what geologists refer to as a glacial cirque. Because of the glacial action that carved it out, that resulted in some very dramatic topography. And right over there, a little further than what you see there, is where it drops off very suddenly and steeply. And it's about 1,000 feet from up here down to the floor of the Great Gulf, at a very steep pitch. And the Great Gulf occupies this huge space between us here on Mount Washington on its south side and the northern presidentials, with Mounts Clay and Jefferson on the west side of the Great Gulf, and directly opposite us on the north side are Mounts Adams and Madison. Now, as of yesterday, on this side of Mount Jefferson summit cone, there was still a patch of snow. And it's gotten very small. I think it's within days of disappearing. It's behind schedule this year because normally it goes away around the 4th of July. It was behind schedule last year too. It lasted all the way to August 1st. I think it's probably going to be gone in the next day or two. But there is still snow here and there on the mountain, and there may well be some right below us here on this north face of Mount Washington. Last week I saw some hikers up here with skis and snowboards on their backs. Probably just wanted to be able to say they skied in July, because I imagine their run was probably about 2 seconds long. And last week I was over on the east side, and I could see for a fact that there was still snow in Tuckerman Ravine, which is a glacial cirque, very similar to the Great Gulf, has this dramatic topography where the land drops off suddenly, known as the head wall. Tuckerman Ravine sits over on the southeast side of the summit, and that's where most of the skiing takes place, because it gets a lot more snow over there. The winds on Mount Washington prevail from the northwest, so the snow that falls at the summit, most of that gets blown off to the southeast side into Tuckerman's, and that averages about 280 inches annually. They ski over there also because it's a bit more accessible. Now, there are, of course, no ski lifts here on Mount Washington, so if you want to ski it, you have to hike it. And it's about a 4-mile hike from the roadway, New Hampshire 16, on the east side at Pinkham Notch, where you would park, up to the top of the Tuckerman head wall. It's a bit further than that to get up to the Great Gulf here. Unless, of course, you waited till after Memorial Day, and then you could just drive up the auto road. But, of course, there's a lot less snow then. Most of the skiing takes place in April and May, when the snow is beginning to soften up. And people come from all over the country to ski Tuckerman's. You have to be a very accomplished skier to do it because it's extremely challenging, extremely steep. And it wouldn't be unusual on a nice weekend day in April or May to see a couple of thousand people in the bowl of Tuckerman's, between all the skiers and people hiking up and picnicking in the bowl, watching them ski. And it's kind of like being at a major sporting event, because the bowl of the ravine is shaped like a stadium, and when a skier executes a particularly nice run, they get an ovation. And so the acoustics make it sound like you're at a ball game. They've been skiing in Tuckerman's since the 1930s. And in those days, the colleges in this area hosted an annual ski race on the mountain. It was known as the Inferno. And in the 1938 Inferno, an Austrian Olympic skier by the name of Tony Matt made an instant legend of himself here on Mount Washington, when he stood at the start gate up at the summit on his skis and pointed his tips downhill, proceeded down directly off the head wall of Tuckerman's, which would have launched him into the air, and like an Olympic ski jumper, he landed it perfectly in the bowl of Tuckerman's, and then continued seamlessly through the woods all the way down to the bottom at Pinkham Notch. It was a distance of 6 miles, and Tony Matt skied it in 6 minutes. In 1938, now the state of ski technology back then, his boots were probably basically just tied onto the skis with wire. Not very advanced. So Tony Matt was indeed a very accomplished skier. You get a little better look at Mount Clay there. If you look over there to the right, where you see it sloping down, that gives you an idea how steep the drop is into the Great Gulf. And you can see the Gulfside Trail there as it makes its way up the west side of Mount Clay. The Appalachian Trail itself doesn't go right over the top of Mount Clay. It skirts around just to the west. There is a trail that goes right over the top. The AT winds its way in and out of each of these northern presidentials. Separate trails go over their summits. And right about now we're at the spot where here on the Cog we call it pitching over because we've hit the ridge. If you stand at the base on a clear day and look up the mountain, this is the point where the tracks disappear over the top. So the grade gets steeper where we pitch over here and make our way down the west side of the mountain. And we're getting close to tree line as you're seeing more and more scrub pines around us here. The railway does go right down a ridge line here, due west. So we have ravines on either side of us. This is Burt Ravine down here to our right that drains Mount Clay. And over there to our left is the Ammonosic Ravine, which drains the west side of Mount Washington. When we get down onto Jacob's Ladder, we can see over to the left into the Ammonosic Ravine, depending on what the fog is doing at that point. And if you look to the right here, down to the bottom of Burt Ravine, you can see evidence of an avalanche down there. There's a long, oblong-shaped clearing with a bunch of trees down at the far end of it. It's well on its way to regrowing, so it happened a while ago, probably about 15 years ago. We don't see that much on this side of the mountain because the snowpack is much deeper on the other side. Four southern presidential peaks are over here to our left, and a couple of them make up the south wall of the Ammonosic Ravine, and those are Mounts Monroe and Franklin. Mount Franklin's named for Ben Franklin. So 2 of the 9 presidential peaks are named for non-presidents, Mount Clay and Mount Franklin. And then beyond the ravine are Mounts Eisenhower, and the southernmost is Mount Pierce, and that's named for Franklin Pierce, who was the only president to come from New Hampshire. Frog Rock again, here to the left. Rocky the Cog Frog, I like to call him. Different levels of clouds today, and if you look straight ahead there to the right, you can see the Green Mountains of Vermont above that lower cloud patch. On the right side now, we can see down along the railway, almost to the bottom, that cloud is just covering the base station. A little bit further down the left side will get that view as well. Of course, depending on where the clouds are at the time. And in a moment here, we're going to be re-entering Jacob's Ladder, this trestle that is the steepest section of the railway. The grade is 37.41%, and that's also the second steepest railway grade in the world, the steepest being somewhere in Switzerland. And we're just entering the trestle now. Yeah, so this is the Ammonosic Ravine here to the left. It's filled with fog, so we can't see across it. But Mount Monroe is directly to our left on the other side of the ravine. And if you see the ridge line over here to the right on the other side of Burnt Ravine, there's a hiking trail that goes along that ridge called the Jewel Trail. And some of you may have seen the sign for its trailhead down at our base station right beside the tracks. And the Jewel Trail is part of a 9-mile hiking loop that begins and returns to our base station that goes over the summit. It's probably the most popular hiking route to the summit of Mount Washington from the west side. And most people go down the Jewel Trail, which it's above the trees up here on its upper section on the ridge, but it drops into the woods pretty much directly to our right and returns to the base station through the woods. Most people start out here to the left and south following the Ammonosic River on the Ammonosic Ravine Trail, which goes 2.4 miles from the base station up to the top of the ridge over there to the left, where you reach the Lakes of the Clouds hut, the Appalachian Mountain Club hut, which is a hiking hut that you can spend the night at and get meals if you make a reservation. And when you get to the hut, you're at the Appalachian Trail, which on the south side of Mount Washington is known as the Crawford Path. And that's named for two of the White Mountain's earliest pioneers, father and son, Abel and Ethan Allen Crawford, who built the Crawford Path in 1819. So last year was its 200th anniversary. The Crawford Path is the oldest continuously used hiking trail in America. It's 1.4 miles from the hut up to the summit. So about 4.5 altogether, another 4.5 or so down the Jewel Trail. You take the Gulf Side Trail off the summit and it meets the Jewel Trail over here on Mount Clay. And most people that hike that get it done well within a day. Here's the halfway house on the left. Again, if you look at our reflection in the windows we go by, you can see how steeply we're descending the mountain. Because the building is perfectly level, and that acts as a reference